It's Circuit City's anniversary sale. A big birthday celebration packed with savings just for you. Like this RCA 20-inch TV with super stereo sound, remote control, and more. Now only $277. And this Technics 5-disc CD changer with remote. Hours of digital sound for a low $177. Hurry in for our anniversary sale and celebrate with savings.
Welcome to Circuit City, where service is state of the art.
Just a couple of decades ago, it wouldn't be unusual for you to be driving down the road, probably in some kind of business district, and spy a place called Circuit City. The logo may be familiar to some of you, as for a time it was a very popular big box chain, but a specialty one. Unlike Kmart, which we discussed last time, Circuit City was not a general merchandise big box chain. They were a specialty store focusing on a specific part of the market. In their case, it was consumer electronics. Everything from televisions to video game systems to home appliances. Circuit City had it all. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because, yes, Best Buy is in the same market. But Best Buy is still around. Where's Circuit City? Did Best Buy destroy them and hide the body? Well, no, not exactly. Sort of. I mean, it was part of it. Competition didn't help. But Circuit City's problems, much like Kmart, have mostly to do with themselves, and not with anything around them. The origins of what would become the Circuit City we are discussing date all the way back to what was known as the Ward's Company. In early 1949, a man by the name of Samuel Wurtzel was on vacation in Richmond, Virginia, when he first spied, well, a television. They were new things at the time, and it excited him. He was so into this that he moved his whole family to Richmond later that same year and opened a retail store that specialized in consumer electronics. Obviously, back then, selection was rather limited, but electric appliances were also on the horizon. During the 1940s and in the 1950s especially, the big push was that, hey, you don't need a gas stove, you can have an electric stove. Everything ran on electricity. It was the way of the future. Imagine the power! Wurtzel was early to the party, and as such, he had a bit of a leg up over any competition that there may have been. By 1959, he had 4 different stores located in Richmond, selling televisions and appliances. They continued to see growth over the years, opening new locations in New York, Alabama, Washington, D.C., and even as far away as California. They started experimenting with other options at the time, too, selling mail order under the name Dixie Hi-Fi, advertised in hi-fi magazines, and they tried different retail formats, like smaller outlets located in malls, branded as Sight and Sound, as well as Circuit City. Samuel Wurtzel served as president until 1970, though he would remain chairman until 1984. His son, Alan, became CEO in 1972, and he would focus on organizing their acquisitions and getting rid of unprofitable operations, looking at only what was making them money. They had a plan in place by 1973 that prepared them for the future. They had a lot of long-term goals that they were building towards, and this is really good. One of the biggest problems with a lot of CEOs is they only think about tomorrow, or next month, or even next year. When it comes to a corporate structure, you always want to be thinking 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. Yeah, maybe this decision will make you easy money right now, but what's the longevity in that? Can you keep doing that over the next few years? Is this going to shoot your company in the foot sometime later? These are all things you have to think about. But at the time, they were thinking about that. So much so that they began working on their own distribution center and new corporate offices, and created a large warehouse-style showroom known as Ward's Loading Dock, which opened May 1st, 1975. It was, in effect, their first big box store. It was very popular with customers who liked all the stuff that you could fit in this large building. People could come in, look around, see things they didn't even know they could buy, and, on occasion, generally, actually buy the thing. It was doing really well, so they continued to push towards that format, renaming it the Circuit City Superstore in 1978. The first locations under that name appeared in North Carolina on June 22nd of that year. It was about that time they must have realized that the name Circuit City was actually, to be honest, a really good one. It was a catchy name, and it advertised what the store was really about right there in the name. Circuit. When people think circuits, they think of electricity. and they sell electronics. It's perfect. So perfect that the Ward's company officially changed their whole name to Circuit City Stores Incorporated and became listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 1984. Originally, they had leased a lot of their floor space, but with their success, they started acquiring more retail stores and turning them into Circuit Cities. They entered the Los Angeles market by 1985, and things continued to grow, and they did well. So well that in late 1988, they actually had the opportunity to purchase Best Buy. Best Buy was a growing competitor at the time, but by that point, Circuit City's CEO, who was named Richard Sharp, didn't think spending $30 million on the acquisition was necessary. They could simply open a store in Best Buy's home territory of Minneapolis and beat their competitor that way. This was probably their first major mistake, as doubtless you are aware, but it definitely wasn't their only one, because like I said, Best Buy wasn't necessarily the reason they failed. It was a reason, but not the reason. During the 80s and 90s especially, the big draw of Circuit City, beyond the fact that you could go there and get pretty much any electronic device you could possibly want for your home, was their service. Circuit City staff knew electronics, and this is one of the big benefits of specialty big box chains. If you're going to specialize in something, your staff should also be specialized in selling that something, as well as being able to tell the customer how and why buying such a thing would benefit them. For example, if you go to Home Depot, you generally expect the staff to know about home improvement. They should know what kind of wood is best, which nails to use, things like that. That's what customers would expect from a place like Home Depot. Circuit City was like that, but in terms of electronics. And this is a big difference from general big box chains like Walmart and Target, because look, have you ever tried to talk about the electronics with the people that staff the electronics section of Walmart? They don't know, because they're not paid to know. This is a Walmart, people. You're here to get everything, not a specific thing. You want to talk tech? Go to Best Buy. Well, back then, it was go to Circuit City, because they were really good at that. Their staff were educated when it came to consumer electronics, and were good at selling them. Also, they paid their staff, partially at least, based off of commissions, so they were motivated to make sales. But over time, into the 90s and into the early 2000s, things started to go a bit more downhill. For one thing, a lot of Circuit Cities were still, well, old. They had been built very quickly, and a lot of them wound up in really bad locations. They were also out of date in terms of design and needed to be updated badly, so Kmart's problem. Best Buy had grown more slowly, but this meant a lot of their stores were much more modern and very nice inside. Some of the Circuit Cities were nice, but not all of them, and they were no longer in spots that saw a lot of traffic, whereas Best Buys were placed very strategically to maximize customer potential. Technically, in the early days, Circuit City was more of a showroom format rather than a big box chain, but by 2000 they felt like they had to do away with the showroom element and be, well, big boxy. The format was called Horizon. It eliminated their red tower entrances and moved it to the center of the store. It offered lower sight lines with a central checkout at the front of the store. So, like every big box chain. All of these sound like good changes to compete more in the modern day. They made themselves less showroomy, less department store-y, and more big boxy. And regardless of what you think, the format's more profitable, but they made a critical mistake during this revamp. They decided that it was a good idea to push more into the computer market, including things like games and other peripherals. And that's a good thing, but in order to make room for that stuff, they decided to eliminate all their home appliances. This was a completely bewildering and stupid thing to do, because a big part of their customer base came to Circuit City for the home appliances. Those were big sellers, very popular, and made them money. Getting rid of them entirely is just an absurd idea. I get you needed to make extra room for the games and stuff, but a lot of these smaller electronics could have been stored in a more compact way in a different part of the store. Do not sit there and tell me that you needed all that space for the little itty-bitty electronics. You didn't. And maybe you could argue reducing the appliance inventory, but they eliminated it. They were gone. And that meant they could no longer sell them, and people could no longer buy them. To compensate for this, they had intended to open standalone major appliance stores, but they dropped that entirely later, so they just never went back to it. Also, splitting it off into another store would have taken more money. Like, why would you do that? That's dumb. You probably could have enlarged some of your stores to make them cheaper, or just be more clever in terms of how you lay them out. And mind you, this all happened in 2000. The previous year, 1999, Circuit City was the second largest appliance retailer in the United States. They were only behind Sears. Effectively, they had gotten rid of one of their hottest selling commodities, appliances. To put this in perspective, being the second largest appliance retailer in the US had netted them $1.6 billion in sales revenue. The executives felt that if they eliminated the large appliances, they would no longer have to worry about competition from Home Depot and Lowe's, and there'd be big savings for them in warehouse storage and delivery costs. And yeah, maybe. Also, $1.6 billion in sales. Also, it meant that Circuit City wasn't there for the residential housing boom that happened in the mid-2000s. During that time, there was a huge rise in brand new appliance sales. Many of those people would have gone to Circuit City for their appliances if they could have. So that was a pretty big mistake. A really big, stupid mistake. But hey, maybe they can fix it. Maybe they can make everything okay and nothing terrible could go wrong. And I just kept making mistakes, because of course they did. For one thing, because they left the appliance business, they had to retrofit all their stores, because suddenly they had all this empty room where refrigerators were once sitting. And the retrofitting project cost them another $1.5 billion. Recognize that they spent nearly the amount they had made on selling appliances to get rid of them. The math ain't mathin', guys. The whole thing was almost a death blow, and they just started making weird decisions. They pushed another store format that was known as Tide, and it was created based on research conducted that found that apparently women and teenagers were not respected by the Circuit City sales staff. Which, well, I don't know how the study found that conclusion. For some reason, somehow this new format would address these issues. How? I don't know. But the front of the new stores featured windows allowing customers to see in, and the signage was improved, because, you know, women and teenagers can't read otherwise unless the signs are big and bold, I guess. I don't know what they're doing. Don't ask me. But they started to see a steep decline as the 2000s wore on. Their whole get rid of appliances thing was really not helping them at all in any way. They weren't seen as a big computer place necessarily. That was more Best Buy's thing. People had gone to Circuit City for the appliances, and they no longer had those, so why go? But they still were known as having really knowledgeable staff. Yeah, the appliances were an issue, but the staff still knew a lot about computers and were good at selling the electronics. Well, in 2003, they decided it was a really great decision to convert to a single hourly pay structure in every single store. That sounds normal, yes, but remember what I said. They had a commission sales structure, and this change eliminated that entirely. There was no longer any incentive for their employees to sell things or even be that knowledgeable about them, because why? The extra sales had no more benefit to them whatsoever. When they had commission, they had plenty of incentive to sell as much as they could because they got some of the money out of it. It was a good deal for everybody. But with this decision, not only were the employees just furious, but why care? A lot of employees lost all motivation. Previously commissioned sales associates were offered new positions as hourly product specialists. Yes, which is code for please still be experts about this stuff and sell it. Also, we're not paying you for that. And 3,900 people were just simply laid off. To be honest, they probably got lucky. At least they didn't have to stay in a place that obviously didn't appreciate them. This move did save them $130 million per year, sure, which, great. Also, their sales numbers took a nosedive because the employees no longer cared about selling anything. The people in charge kept trying to move things forward in other areas. By 2004, the wireless phone market was booming. There was rapid expansion in that field, which you can see now with the smartphones we all currently possess. Circuit City decided to partner up with Verizon to include full-service Verizon wireless sales and service centers inside each of their stores. The store within a store setup is sometimes still seen in the modern day, and the locations inside the Circuit City were technically owned and staffed by Verizon Wireless, but both companies would benefit by the arrangement. And by benefit, I mean this kind of also had a negative effect on Circuit City in particular. Because yes, they had Verizon inside there, and people would come there if they were using that service. But as part of the agreement, Circuit City had to stop selling wireless phones with every other carrier. They only focused on Verizon. So once again, you are suddenly limiting your product line. And for what? Oh, we have a Verizon location inside of Circuit City. Yeah, great, but what if their phone isn't Verizon? They have no reason to come to you now. And in April of that year, they decided it was a really good idea to spend $284 million. What? To purchase a Canadian retailer known as Intertan. This included 980 stores, which operated under several trade names, including Radio Shack, Rogers Plus, and Battery Plus. The CEO of Circuit City at that time, Alan Micolo, felt that these small format stores provided an easy entry point for Circuit City into Canada. And, okay, maybe, but you know you could have done that without, spending $284 million. That was possible. And, you didn't do that. You spent over $250 million instead. That's great. When the announcement was made, Radio Shack, like the actual company, Radio Shack, sued Intertan over the branding use of Radio Shack in Canada. Circuit City, now the owners of Intertan, lost, and all the Radio Shacks in Canada had to be renamed The Source by Circuit City in 2005. They were later sold off to Bell Canada. So to catch you up with how Circuit City's rolling thus far, they have eliminated a significant portion of things that actually sold. They have limited themselves to only a single cell phone carrier. They have angered all of their staff by reducing their pay heavily, and they spent $284 million to acquire a company only to be immediately sued and lose said lawsuit. You with me so far? Everything's great, everything's fine, everything's wonderful. In 2007, they tried to introduce another new store format because yes, that's the problem. No, unlike Kmart, which probably could have benefited from a proper re-imaging well in advance of their first bankruptcy, Circuit City only ever really needed to re-image themselves once, and they did do that. By this time, their woes were purely self-inflicted by them routinely cutting off their own limbs, in effect, taking themselves out of profitable markets, things that had made them money, or limiting themselves in stupid ways, and then spending what little money they had left on things that weren't helping them, such as a new 20,000 square foot store format, which was only called The City. Great, so you remove the one word in your name that tells people what you're even about. Circuit. Electronics, we got that. You remove Circuit, and now you're just The City. What does it even mean? You sell building materials now? Okay, to be fair, they did still have Circuit City underneath the logo, but it was no longer predominant. It was dumb. Though the intention was actually to shrink down the stores and to eliminate previously underutilized space. But why would you have extra space? Could it be because you had a lot of extra space after you took out all the appliances? Because you didn't need that much room for the computer stuff? Yeah, about that. Anyway, the smaller format gave them greater flexibility to enter newer markets, as well as backfill existing ones, which is good, I guess, but it didn't really help them. On February 8th of 2007, they announced that they planned to close 7 of their stores, as well as a Kentucky distribution center, to cut costs. 62 other stores located in Canada were also to close down. And if you're wondering why they're making so many stupid and seemingly random decisions, well, that's because the people in charge weren't, really in charge for very long. During the early 2000s, Circuit City watched senior officers come and go at a rate that was deeply alarming. The guys that were in charge were quickly replaced, but the new person often had a different idea on how to fix things, and then they left. And then the new guy came in, and they had another idea. And everyone had a different idea, but no one had the same direction. If it had just been one person, they may have realized the error, saw the problems, and worked to fix them. But because everyone kept treating Circuit City like a revolving door, there was no consistency when it came to upper management. And in another way to cut costs, they decided that the starting wage for their new employees would be dropped from $8.75 down to $7.40 an hour. So your already unmotivated employees are now even less motivated. Oh, yes, and they laid off 3,400 of their employees, specifically the ones that they were paying more because they had been there longer. They laid off the experienced staff, the ones that were still working for them, had gotten through all the nonsense, and actually knew how to do their jobs. Yeah, they got rid of those to replace them with a bunch of newbies who had no idea what they were doing and were being paid even less. The inevitable result of this decision, well, maybe it made them money in the short term, saved them money on wages, meant that sales trickled to a near standstill. Circuit City, which again had once been known as having experienced and helpful staff, was now seen as practically useless because none of the staff really knew anything, because they were brand new, underpaid, and there were no more experienced personnel to teach them. In 2008, Blockbuster announced a bid worth $1 billion to actually buy Circuit City, but even in their last years, as they were also starting to fail by that point, Blockbuster knew that this was a bad idea, and by July withdrew the offer. By this point, Circuit City was almost seen as a joke to some people, and quite a literal one, as an issue of Mad Magazine decided to parody them, describing it as Sucker City. It was a pretty stupid joke, to be honest, not really that funny, but whatever, maybe some people liked it. But you know who didn't like it? The head office of Circuit City, who in hysterical, outright comical fashion ordered their remaining stores to destroy all copies of the issue. This particular maneuver did hit the news, and had they left it alone, probably nobody would have laughed that hard about the whole thing. But because the head office had this overreaction, the whole thing became instantly hilarious. By 2008, the CEO, president, and chairman of Circuit City Stores Incorporated was Philip J. Schoonover, and he announced his immediate resignation on September 22nd. James A. Markham was made acting CEO, but by that time there was really no saving Circuit City. You could get the most genius businessman in charge, and they wouldn't have been able to do anything, because all these bad decisions over the preceding decade had finally caught up with them. They couldn't cope with any of it, and they were being mocked openly. On November 4th, 2008, they announced they would close 155 of their stores and lay off a further 17% of their workforce by the end of that year. They weren't bluffing either. 3 days later, they laid off at least 500 corporate employees from their own headquarters, and on November 10th, they filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 11 in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. By this point, their stock value was well below $1 per share, and with them in bankruptcy, they were removed from the listing on the New York Stock Exchange. But early on, there was some hope that perhaps Circuit City could be salvaged. There was room for them in the market. Like I said, it wasn't that Best Buy destroyed them, it was that they had, done it to themselves. But if they could be restructured and managed a little bit better, they probably would be alright. As such, they were approved to borrow $1.1 billion to finance operations while they were in the restructuring process. Filings in court showed that their assets totaled to be about $3.4 billion, and their debt was only $2.32 billion. But that was actually a really good number. Considering their size, that debt is surprisingly low. Their assets were higher than their debts. And at first, CEO James A. Markham promised the stores would stay open and that they weren't planning to liquidate the chain. But over time, things started looking a lot worse. By January 10th, 2009, they announced they actually needed a buyer in order to keep the lights on. The company would have to be sold, and it had to be within just 6 days, January 16th. This was due to an approaching deadline that had been set by both the court and the creditors. Unless they found a buyer by then, they'd have to start shutting things down very quickly. 2 unnamed parties were interested in buying out the company, but interest doesn't mean actually doing it. Nobody wanted to touch them, and as such, their Chapter 11 bankruptcy was converted to Chapter 7. Liquidation. They used the last of their money to air going out of business commercials, which some of you who are old enough probably remember seeing, because they still had to pay off that debt somehow, and yeah, they could sell off their assets, but that would take time. But since they were going out of business, they might as well start selling all the product they still had remaining at astonishingly reduced rates. No joke, this all happened back when I had just learned to drive, so I actually went myself to one of the closing Circuit Cities around. I don't remember what I bought, but I know it was a really good price, because, yeah, going out of business sales usually mean you can get some pretty good stuff for next to nothing. And it was probably the first time in a long time where people actually had fun going to Circuit City, because, hey, look at all these amazing deals. Despite the consumer benefits, the remaining employees obviously didn't benefit, because without a company, you don't have a job. Over 30,000 people lost their jobs when Circuit City went under. That included Verizon employees, because remember, they had the stores within the store. Without Circuit City, Verizon had to shut down a lot of their own stores and laid off 45% of their workforce, though to their credit they did work to reassign as many people as they could to other Verizon locations. The last day of operation for every single Circuit City was March 8th, 2009, and the liquidation was considered completed the following day, and that included their online store. But the story of Circuit City doesn't quite end there. The company was gone, but the assets remained, as did the brand, and someone did eventually want to buy them. In April of 2009, another company called Systemax signed what's known as a stalking horse agreement for $6.5 million to purchase Circuit City's assets. Now, what the heck is a stalking horse agreement? That sounds really silly, but it is an actual thing. I did not make this up, I promise. A stalking horse offer, or agreement, or bid is defined as a bid for a bankrupt firm or its assets that is arranged in advance of an auction. So it functions like a reserve bid. Basically, Systemax promised that they would buy Circuit City's remaining assets for at least $6.5 million. And a benefit for Circuit City on this side is that meant when they were auctioned off, they would make at least that much. But it would wind up being more. On May 13th, 2009, Systemax did wind up winning Circuit City, which included the brand name, trademarks, and the e-commerce website, but for $14 million. They had to raise their bid to win. But they did win, and obtained ownership on May 19th, 2009. They relaunched CircuitCity.com on May 22nd as an only online retailer of consumer electronics. By this point, Systemax already owned both CompUSA and Tiger Direct, and ran websites under those names too, selling pretty much the same stuff, and pretty much under the same format. They were just utilizing those trademarks because people were familiar with them. But by 2012, Systemax felt like they had gotten all they could out of the arrangement, and decided to drop both the CompUSA and Circuit City storefront brands, and they would consolidate the business under just the Tiger Direct brand, ending the use of Circuit City's brand name. But in more recent times, the possible revival of Circuit City has been entertained and attempted. In January 2016, it was reported that the brand might be revived as what would be known as the Circuit City Corporation by an area retail veteran named Ronnie Schmoel. He acquired the rights to the brand from Systemax, who gladly sold it since they weren't even using it. And he originally planned to reopen Circuit City in June of 2016, but that would be postponed until 2018. On August 22nd of that year, they officially relaunched the brand name as an online retailer, and did announce plans to begin operating as a store within a store chain. You remember how Verizon was doing that with Circuit City when they were bigger? Well, now Circuit City was going to do that with somebody else, though they never really got that far. They did also want to open standalone Circuit City retail stores at some point, but that still hasn't happened either. And the tail end of 2023, December 13th, they were looking to raise $25 million so they could establish strategic alliances with other stores and launch a Powered by Circuit City initiative. It's unclear how all this is going to pan out. It's kind of hard to revive a dead brand, especially one as lambasted as Circuit City was. Granted, it's still a good name, and I understand the intention here, but I'm not so sure about the strategy personally. Store within a store is a double-edged sword, as Verizon found out. And just making it Powered by Circuit City? I mean, okay, great. But is that really going to help you? Especially since one of the rumored partners is JCPenney, and they've been struggling too. I'm not sure either is going to be helped by this situation. But regardless, this new Circuit City is not really the old one at all. It's a totally different company, they're just using the same name. The old one is long gone and always will be. Some people have fond memories of them. But let's be real, their end was justly deserved. They made so many stupid decisions. From getting rid of one of their biggest moneymakers to angering literally everyone that worked for them. Had they chosen not to do even just one of those things, they would probably still be around in their original form, because Best Buy alone wasn't going to outdo them. For the same reason that Target alone can't beat Walmart, or vice versa. There's room for 2 exclusive electronics big box stores in a modern market. That's totally doable. But Circuit City chose to continually punch themselves right in the face. It's kind of embarrassing. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord Off 444, iSurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redline, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues, Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Caleb Brainwaters, Perez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Linsky, Jared Brussel, JBL Explorers, Tom Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitchen 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Trevel, Hayden DeGrow, Metal for Life Guy, No, Kurt Forkum, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Morris Tillman Productions, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Weston Colorado History, Ryan Wehofer, Duralshi, Your Mom Liked It, Windy City Rails, 8-Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Razor 78, Shimasu, Murder Drone Stall, Eric Hutton, AET Museum, NJ 1969, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.